Hey everybody, Matt Barton here with this week's Broker Minute or Two. A integral part of what we do from time to time is canceling contracts. And it sounds like a pretty straightforward operation, right? We cancel. Everybody's in agreement. It's not always so simple though. Sometimes we as agents unintentionally create additional problems because we don't understand the process. So I'm going to quickly go through this to make sure we are all on the same page. In the purchase contract, the real estate purchase contract, if we go down to section 18, okay, section 18 is the section titled notices, and cancellation is a notice, just to start off on the same page, right? So in this section, there are three agreed upon hard requirements for proper notice, therefore proper cancellation. One, it must be in writing. So when you say so-and-so said, or we were all in agreement, right? It has to be in writing. It has to be signed, which is kind of hard to sign a verbal agreement. And the third one that we miss quite often, it's like, it's almost like we get transaction fatigue. We jump the first two hurdles, we get it in writing, we get it signed, and then we let it sit. You actually have to deliver it, right? And you have to have that proof of delivery for us to be protected. So item C, it must be received either by the person being notified, whether it's the buyer or the seller, or their respective agent, or the brokerage firm. And let me just pause here for a minute. I think it's a good practice anytime we're doing a cancellation to make sure unequivocally that there's no question as to whether we canceled. So I would actually take those three. If you have information for the client, great. Include them on the sending of the cancellation. Certainly send it to their agent and always CC their broker. That way, nobody can ever say, oh, I never received it, blah, blah, blah. You had the wrong email address. You create some redundancy to make it very difficult for somebody to say the hurdle of Section 18 was not jumped. Now, let me just segue for 2 seconds here, because there's a connection. If you don't do it correctly, and this is a close cousin to the cancellation, or if somebody's in default, but I'm going to use the example of if you don't cancel correctly and then a default occurs, like they wanted to cancel based on due diligence, they wanted to cancel on the F&A or the financing and appraisal deadline, and it wasn't done properly, and then you get to the settlement deadline and they're not able to settle, well, a default has been created. And it's important to remember this, because I still get this a lot from our own agents. The defaulting party does not get to choose the remedy in Section 16. The non-defaulting party, the aggrieved party, the ones that were still engaged, get to choose the remedy. I've had agents say, well, we canceled and we're going to give them the earnest money. I'm like, not your choice. They get to choose what they're going to do. So that's important to remember. Now listen, here's the final point I wanted to make on this. When we are within the company, when we are processing a cancellation, we get requests from agent, hey, we canceled this listing because the buyer backed out, blah, 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 and we want to put it back active on the MLS. Well, our office managers are trained to look for certain things. One, they need to have documentation. It must be in writing, it must be signed, and it must be received by the other party no later than the deadline that is required. So I'm going to show you this. This is a screenshot within SkySlope. We're on the transaction, a particular transaction. I grayed out all the information, but it's on the checklist tab. Now, here are the things that were completed on this transaction. It's what our office managers managed to. And notice down the bottom, it says we have to have a copy uploaded of the buyer's notice of cancellation, right? But we're not quite done there. We have to have proof that it was delivered. So first point, if you send the cancellation through SkySlope, there's a paper trail showing we sent it to the agent, to their broker, to the client, whoever. And we're going to be adding an item here in the transaction list that we need proof of the notice of cancellation. And so just know that's why the office managers will ask you for, well, do you have an email when you sent the cancellation over? Can you please upload that into SkySlope or send me a copy and I'll upload it into SkySlope. And then the last point I wanted to make on this is, let me get back to my PDFs here, is the cancellation itself. Now remember that Section 18 were the 3 hard requirements in the REPSI for a cancellation. Now, for whatever reason, I'm not going to speculate as to why, UAR, when they created their cancellation form, of course it has the buyer and the seller's name and the property address, the property of interest, blah, blah, blah. And frankly, I've advocated for them to just say, this is a notice of cancellation signed by the buyer or seller. Because the terms that govern a cancellation are very explicit in the REPSI. There's literally no requirement in the REPSI to say, I have to state why I'm canceling. It just says in the notice section, cancellation must be in writing, must be signed by the party, and it must be delivered. So for instance, I've told some agents this, probably the safest thing to do is to check item number 3, notice of cancellation of the REPSI, and that's it. And then have everybody sign, right? You've hit number 1 here, you've hit number 2 here, and then by uploading proof of delivery in and attaching it to the transaction in SkySlope, we have everything needed to defend a cancellation. So if you do check the box, there's nothing wrong with saying yes, we're canceling on due diligence, but it's actually not required. Same for financing and appraisal deadline. Here's where I see the biggest problems for most agents. They check item 3, they check other, and they give some crazy explanation, which just creates exposure for people to contest the cancellation, right? Section 8.1, Section 8.3, the due diligence, the financing deadline have such powerful contract language in there. It says it's at the buyer's sole discretion. Why muck it up? Why introduce a reason? You're not required in the contract to give a reason. So listen, that was my broker minute or 7 on proper cancellation and the tangent pieces to it so that you do it right and avoid having situations where earnest money is unintentionally lost for your clients. Okay, let me know if you have any questions and have a great week.